Nick Fuentes, he is making waves, was just invited to Tucker Carlson's show. Now, for those of you who are unaware, there has been a little bit of a scuffle, to say the least, between Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes. As two right-wing individuals, they had the typical face-to-face, in real life, as the kids would say, meeting, right? What happens when two right-wing individuals meet IRL for the first time? I thought you were a Fed. I thought you were a Fed. That tends to be how it goes. And so they were attempting to hash out some of their differences. And then Tucker Carlson simply playing the investigator, journalist, a good interviewer, and simply asking questions, giving Nick a chance to say what he really believes. Now, there's been a ton of people who are clutching their pearls and very, very, very troubled, very concerned that Tucker Carlson would give an opportunity like this to someone like Nick. Now, that's what we're going to be discussing. Was this a bad move? Was this the wrong call? That's what we'll be discussing in this episode. We're going to talk about conservative gatekeeping, why it's dying, and why, to show our hand preemptively, we think that that is a positive development. In addition to gatekeeping and some of the strategies there and why it needs to fall apart, why it needs to come to an end, that'll be our first segment. But also, in addition to that, our second segment, we want to talk about some of the discourse, not so much the politics, but really getting down to culture, getting down to men and women and marriage and family. We wanted to talk about what we found is one of the most interesting portions of the interview of Nick Fuentes with Tucker Carlson, which had to do with dating and marriage. It had to do with men. It had to do with certain devastating vices such as pornography. What do young men do today when the distance between single men and single women is so vast? At a certain point of this interview, Nick even mentioned some of the data on this subject. I believe he cited a 45-point difference between the political proclivities of young single women and those of young single men. In other words, to put it blatantly, to put it short, young single men are right-wing. Young single women are just horrible, just absolutely horrible. I saw on X the other day, and I think it was well said. Someone said that women vote overwhelmingly for pro-immigrant policies and legislators, politicians. And now we have young women all over our country, and especially when you think of England and certain European countries who are rising up, young single women, social influencers saying, we need men. We need men to stand up and to be men and to protect us. We don't feel safe. What does that really mean? What it means is that right now, what we have going on in the West is young women voting in hordes of foreigners that steal, that sexually assault, that murder, and then those same young women saying, we voted for this, and now we need men in our country to die for this. That's where we're at. The young women are a liability. Young women in the West are a liability on the West and its potential survival. And young men have woken up. Now, Tucker Carlson, being 56 years old, is, I think, wise. I think in many ways godly. And I'm super grateful for him. But I think it's fair to say that he demonstrated that despite some of the maturity, the experience, and wisdom, Tucker Carlson, at least on this subject, is wildly out of touch. And Nick got to the heart of some of these things. Now, I still would like to see more biblical solutions. So we'll discuss some of that in this episode as well. So, conservative gatekeeping, that age has ended. We think that's positive. We'll tell you strategically, politically, and culturally why. Also, talking about men and women and the ever-increasing vast gap between the two. What does that mean for young men in them needing to get married, needing to be husbands, needing to be fathers. What's going to happen culturally? What's going to happen with the family? What's going to happen in our churches with young Christian men in America as we look towards the coming years? All this and more on today's episode. Tune in now.
Well, if we had a tombstone for conservative gatekeeping, I think the years that you would put on it for its lifespan, 2015 to 2025 about. I think that's fair, a nice round number. It's been about 10 years that there was a conservative Inc., right? You can think of the big institution, the big corporation. Big con. And it said, in more ways than one, and it said, you must toe this line, you must say these things if you want to have a platform. We've mentioned it many times over the past couple of months. But you guys have to understand, 5, 6, 7 years ago, there weren't that many names in town. There were a couple big shows, a couple big platforms, a Daily Wire really being the big one. And there were really only certain things that you could say. And Nick is case in point. Love the guy or hate the guy. He came up in a time where he said, I have questions about this. I'm not going to repeat these lines. He goes through all of this with Tucker Carlson, how he was ostracized by the Daily Wire types, literally people that worked at Daily Wire.
Ben Shapiro. He was ostracized by Right Side Broadcasting. So this when he had less than 1,000 followers on Twitter.
Think about that.
Ben Shapiro nuked him from orbit twice. It was like, I've got to crush this guy.
I've got to crush the questions he's answering.
And for the record, that was Nick before a lot of the things, eventually what Nick ended up doing, as many young single men being 17, 18, 19 years old, is after being nuked from orbit, he leaned in and played the heel. And I don't think he should have done that. I don't. I mean, do it a little, maybe, in some strategic ways. But yeah, I think he leaned in and went too far. But Ben Shapiro nuked him before any of that happened. So this is not Ben Shapiro nuking Nick, when he's halfway in and he's saying some of his most unhinged things.
Right.
This is a time when Nick was just barely getting started. He had virtually zero influence. And at that point, the worst thing that he had said was, I don't think that we should be, in bed with Israel. And Ben Shapiro instinctively was like, I've got to crush this man.
I can't believe he would
say that. So all that back to your point, besides making it just about Ben Shapiro, on the whole, that was big con, big conservative Inc. That was the sentiment. That was the ethos, was meticulous gatekeeping. Must be within our frame. Anything out of it, not just we won't give you an opportunity, we will destroy you. That's what it's been for 10 years.
So whether it was big con, and social media giants, your Facebook, your Instagram, they were in cahoots. And people don't understand. They could take your livelihood.
Yes.
They could take your source of money from advertising, your platform where you found viewers. Like especially it was during the Biden administration, the first 2 years or so prior to Musk buying Twitter. I mean, you'd have people that were just nuked from orbit. I used to watch them here. I used to catch them on YouTube, where I used to see their posts on Twitter. And they possess the power enough that these people could virtually be deleted from the internet. Think of that power. Hundreds of thousands of people follow you. They tune into your show. They listen to your stuff. They pass around your writings. And one group, one institution has the power to say, you're never going to see anything from this person ever again. And that was 10 years of gatekeeping. Someone mentioned Buckley in there. This is a very long-standing conservative tradition, right? What do conservatives exist to do? Conserve the victories of the left from 10 years ago.
Right.
So I'm being a little funny, 2015 to 2025. Yeah. That's a microcosm of a generational pattern.
Sometimes
of
to make a point, you give a quote from somebody.
Right.
And then sometimes you give a hypothetical quote for the future that you think, right? So I want to say, give that disclaimer. This is not an actual quote yet. My prediction, 5 to 10 years, you'll have someone like James Lindsay saying, Democrats are the real pedophiles. So I say that because it really does kind of put a point on it. When you think of, what do you mean conservatives are just solidifying, shoring up the past victories of the left, just coming behind them, 5 to 10 years later? What I mean is precisely that. I mean, now we have the conservative movement where, you have guys vehemently defending same-sex marriage, right? And it's not preposterous to think, so what does it mean to be a conservative? Conservatives have conserved nothing, ever. So the idea of saying that a conservative in the future, 5 to 10 years from now, would just say, well, Democrats are the real pedophiles. That's kind of what conservatives have done, right? That's been our entire rhetoric for decades. Democrats are the real racist. Democrats are the real, but even that, what that proves is that conservatives have already assumed a leftist, Marxist frame, right? So Democrats are the real racist, meaning what? We concede all ground. Mm-hmm. We admit that there are no distinctions in the world that God has created, that to even see color as a category at all is inherently wicked and sinful, and we won't do it. Well, here's the deal. You think that's conservative, but every prior generation before the 1960s would have disagreed with you.
Right.
The liberals would have disagreed with you. So you just have to admit, right? You can say, well, they were wrong, and so we fixed it. Okay, well, that's fine. But then pick a different word besides conservative, because conservative, it implies you're conserving something. But anytime you actually pin a conservative down and talk to them about these kinds of things, they'll immediately pivot and say, oh, well, yeah, we're not conserving old things because all the old people were racist and mean. And so then you have to say, okay, so then you're not actually a conservative. You're a progressive, just a slower progressive than the other progressives, right? There are quick progressives and slow progressives. That's what a conservative is a slow progressive. I personally am not interested in the slightest in either position. I don't want to be a fast progressive or a slow progressive. I want to be the new Christian right. I want to be a Christ follower. I want to be a voice in the wilderness crying out, make straight the way for the Lord. I don't want to conserve anything from the 20th century, good bit of the 19th century. I want to, as the kids would say, return. We must return. Return like 20 years ago? No.
Back to 2005.
Return. Old school.
People forget because the cultural tide is shifting so quickly. But I remember it was probably 2017, 2018. Dave Rubin, a gay man, him and his partner adopting 2 boys. And conservatives were all in his comments saying, congratulations.
Yeah.
Congratulations on human trafficking 2 children away from their mother. And we forget that. Guys, those are the conservatives. And the worst thing about it, if you can imagine the left going through a hallway and slamming open the door and breaking and transgressing boundaries, gay marriage, adoption, gays having children, as they go and they open those doors, conservatives are coming in behind them, they're closing the doors, and with their gatekeeping, they're locking it. So like, here's the way the left progressed here, and here's the victory that they had, and we're going to come in, we're going to take this space, and we're going to close the door on even going back to it. And then what you have is young men saying, hey, actually, okay, we have gay marriage now. This was passed, but this was vastly unpopular 10 years ago. And so I'd like to return to a time where we didn't have gay marriage. And Conservative Inc. says, you're off the reservation. You are allowed to go this far. We have solidified this victory for the left. We will not be interested whatsoever in taking it back and rewinding it. You can go no further. And all that to say, all that to sum it up, they had a vice hold and they ruined many, many people's lives. And Nick is not the only one. There's people that have spent their entire careers, Pat Buchanan being one of them, other guys that are just finally reemerging. They spent decades in the wilderness, decades being silenced. And not silenced because they were unhinged, not silenced because they were crazy, not silenced because they were hateful, silenced because they were right, they had the receipts, they had the evidence, and conservatives in hand, oftentimes with liberals, said, we don't want anyone to hear from you ever again.
Right.
But that era is, and I think this interview that came out, this would have been Monday night. I think that honestly signifies the end of it. They had a very cordial discussion. They had their disagreements. They had their differences. We'll talk a little bit later about it. But Tucker said, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to have this young man come in. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to hear him out. I'm going to have dinner with it. I think we would both like to go on the record and say, hey, we have listeners. Some of them don't like Nick. Some of them love Nick. And honestly, perfectly fair. You guys don't have to agree with us.
Yeah, you don't have to like Nick.
But as far as the gatekeeping goes, as far as being willing to have someone who's interesting, who's had something to say, and that people are listening to. 500,000 subscribers on Rumble, 1 million followers on X.
Right.
This is a guy people are listening to say, hey, I've heard
a
a lot
million
about
on
you.
X, and he had 400,000 on X just earlier this year.
Yeah. Generational.
Huge.
Run.
Yeah, huge increase. Fast.
So you don't have to agree with the guy to say, this is someone that people are listening to. This is someone, young men who are setting up the future of this country. They're listening to him. And you know what? You can't tell me, a grown man, with my platform, Tucker Carlson's not with Fox anymore. You can't tell me, a grown man, who I can and can't have on my show.
That's right.
So I'm going to bring him in. I'm going to ask him about what I want to ask him about. And as far, again, maybe you disagree with our take, we would both say that is a good thing that gatekeeping is ending. Let people's arguments stand on their own merits.
Right.
Let them stand or fall based on the person, their character, their arguments, the weight on the merits of what they're actually advocating for. Let that happen. And I think people would be surprised. You know, I want to give an example here. Most of you are probably familiar, have heard the name David Duke, former Grand Klansman in the KKK.
Right.
And honestly, a degenerate. In the 90s, he was telling people he was broke, that he needed all these donations to run for office. He was using that money to gamble, and he actually spent time in prison. He denied it. He claims that they had the case rigged against him. But I mean, the dude spent time in prison for embezzling money. And he's never really accomplished, to be honest, much in life. He ran numerous times for the United States House of Representatives. Never even got close. Never even was competitive. Well, earlier this year and some of last year, he actually kind of started making the rounds. He was on Hodge
Right.
Twins. He was on Jake Shields' podcast. And so if you're saying, oh, no, gatekeeping is good, we have to keep these people out because if they get into the public consciousness, if people hear what they actually have to say, they're so antagonistic, they're so combative, they're going to draw people in and we won't be able to stop talking about them. They're going to dominate the discourse. Well, I don't know about you, Joel. I have not heard much about David Duke.
Yep.
He came,
Yep.
and then people realized, actually, he doesn't have a lot of
He
substance.
doesn't have substance. Yeah. So
And
it's
he left.
So we're going to give him a chance. Oh, you can't do that because if you give him any oxygen at all, then he's going to, come roaring into a flame and burn down the entire country. No, the only people who are actually capable of doing that are people who have something to say. They have some substance. And that's the whole thing is, on the one hand, like, you kind of have to make up your mind. So either Nick is a gay fed and retarded, in which case him going on Tucker Carlson is just going to convince a lot of people that he's a gay fed and retarded.
Right.
And everybody's going to laugh at him and they're not going to hear him and his numbers on his own channel will start to go down and he'll fade into obscurity. Or you're saying, I don't want anybody to give even an ounce of limelight to Nick because he's compelling, he has substance, he's persuasive, he's right, not about everything, but about enough, about a lot of things. And I actually am terrified, and not just terrified, but I actually despise right-wing ideology. And I don't want it to win the day. So I need to fight it unfairly. I need to take right-wing views and tie their hands behind their back. And I think it's the latter. I think we just have to admit that a lot of the people who are coming out, they'll say, well, he's just so terrible, or he's so horrible, or he's this, or he's that. But that's not really, I don't think that's true. I don't think that's what people really mean. I think what they really mean is we're terrified that he's winning. We're terrified that he's going to win. And we don't want him to win because at the end of the day, we don't actually want America to be right-wing. We want America to be a neocon nation. We want George Bush America, right? We want Israel as our greatest ally. Yes, God's called men to be leaders in their home, but we want to still reserve the right to define what does that mean. And what does it mean, of course? Absolutely nothing. We want to say that we value women and maybe not put them in combat positions in the military, but everything else, they can function just like a man. We want our women, our blonde-haired women in pantsuits, making speeches, pacing back and forth behind a podium and telling men what to do. We love that. Those are American values and represent freedom. So my point is, that's conservatism. That's what it is. And so I just would appreciate if conservatives would be honest and just come out and say, we're libs. We are libs. And yes, we don't want these things to get oxygen to get airtime because we are trying to conserve liberalism. And I think it's, for me, I tweeted something out the other day. I have known, it's like 3 years ago, 4 years, it was probably 4 years ago, I recognized James Lindsay is not a conservative, right? And then that was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. 3-4 years ago. And then about 1 year ago, I realized, and this is a shift. I want to try to illustrate it for you. So let's say 3-4 years ago, I realized James Lindsay is not a conservative. 1 year ago, I realized James Lindsay is a conservative. And I hope you pick up what I mean by that. So at first, it's like, he's not really a conservative. Later on, as I got older and saw a little bit more, learned a little bit more, I realized, oh, the problem is not James Lindsay not being a conservative. The problem is not James Lindsay. The problem is the entire conservative movement. James actually is a conservative. I think he's a perfect representation, actually, of what a conservative is. A liberal atheist who spent his young adult years trying to destroy the Church of Jesus Christ, who says that amateur porn is an expression of freedom of speech. That's conservative. Mm-hmm. That's what it means. That's literally what it means. So when I finally kind of realized that, I realized, I don't need to be making the arguments James Lindsay is not a true conservative. I just need to be perfectly comfortable and say Joel Webbin is not a conservative. Now that I've seen behind the curtain, I know what it means to actually be a conservative. I don't want anything to do with it. Joel Webbin is not a conservative, and neither is Jesus Christ. Jesus hates American conservatism. Right. I believe that. So I think that's why there's the gatekeeping. That's why there's kind of the full press attack, full court press against someone like Nick Fuentes going on Tucker Carlson. There's a lot to preserve right now. And I think that conservatives are really, really feeling the heat. They're really feeling like the threat is, right on their back. They realize, man, we've got a good thing going right now. And we can't afford to lose this. And so that's, I think, where we're at.
I was going to say, too, media, it reveals who people really are. Like, say someone is truly hateful. And I actually think of, I think she's the senator from California, Katie Porter. She came out, it was a clip from like 2023, where she is screaming and cursing at an intern. People can fake it for a while. But on a long enough timeline, if someone stays in the public light and they're interacting with people, I think of Jesus who says, like, what is done in secret will be shouted from the rooftops. Mm-hmm. Who people really are, it actually can't be hidden forever. So you can come out and say, well, this guy got platformed and he's running a psyop on all of you, and he's not really this, and he's really hateful in his heart. I actually don't have a lot of fear that long-term, 10, 20 years, someone could run that play, because over and over and over again, whether it's men that have had affairs, whether it's people that are abusive to their staff, whether it's people that embezzle money, every single person, I would say, that's not truly made, especially, well, men especially, of the stuff of a good man that have staying power, they get revealed. Yeah, actually, this person is, he paid other people to write his sermons for him. Guys like J.D. Greer. Right. This person is actually behind the scenes. They're a terrible, awful person to work with. Oh, this man isn't faithful to his wife. The Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton. So over and over again, if someone doesn't have staying power, being in public is absolutely this beautiful litmus test that I would say chops up and grinds out all of the fakers. It's a really good way of it being done. And so I don't have a lot of fear. Someone has a platform. Someone ascends to this level. Someone passed this test and made it to the next part. Well, we'll see who they are. When the pressure is on, when they're called to recant, we'll see in an age where the internet is forever. What have they literally said on camera? There's no like back scenes or leaked footage. What are they literally saying up front today, daily on their show, weekly on whatever podcast they produced? Those are really great litmus tests, and they often reveal who someone really is. So I don't have a fear of he's got a platform and he's going to be saying these things. People will see through it, and I think they have an incredible ability, especially men who can be protective and discerning. They can see it and say, nah, this guy isn't for real. Or alternatively, someone makes it and they say, yeah, actually, this guy is legit. He actually is sharp. And I can see these aspects, not just talking about Nick here, but I can see these aspects of his character, these things of virtue shining through. Obviously, I'm biased, but like in the last couple of years, Joel, a number of people have tried to, be it sermons or be it this, like take him out and clip him out and pull him out and say, you can't platform this guy. You can't be friends with this guy. But then people actually come out and they say, no, actually, I know Joel. He's the real deal.
Mhm.
And he's right about this. And he's been right about that. Even with Charlie Kirk, a number of people came and they said, I thought you were going too far. I thought you were off the reservation. And I watched Charlie Kirk get shot by a violent leftist, and I realized, no, Joel was right. He was just early.
Mhm.
So the public square, I would say, it does reveal the truth. Not immediately,
Over time.
but over time.
Yeah, well said. So yeah, we think that gatekeeping for conservatives is largely a net negative and has been for quite some time. And I've seen people in the comments saying, it's more than 10 years. It's been at least 2 generations, going all the way back to Buckley, gatekeeping against Buchanan and all these things. And that's absolutely true. I guess what we're expressing is not, gatekeeping among conservatives in terms of its entire history, like the history of the neocons, but we're saying, at least in its most recent and heightened expression of, social media, podcast, those kinds of things. It really does feel like that's been a 10-year period now, from 2015 to 2025. And I'll add with that, it is one of the reasons why the Daily Wire became so successful.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of you who are fans of the Daily Wire, I think you do need to at least recognize that. On the one hand, the Daily Wire was early just to media and podcasting and these kinds of things, starting, their company in Jeremy Boring's pool house, and podcasting before podcasting even really took off, before it became as big as it was. So being an early adopter is a big part of it. That's part of why Joe Rogan is so popular.
Right.
It's not just because he was in, media and television and things like that, previously, but also, Joe Rogan was one of the first podcasters. He was an early adopter. So Daily Wire became popular for a number of reasons. Some of those are credits to them, like being early adopters and having a good business strategy, at least initially, and those kinds of things. But also one of the reasons Daily Wire just soared into total ascendancy is because Daily Wire in 2020 through 2024, when a lot of people were completely blacklisted or suppressed, Daily Wire, they definitely had some challenges. I remember hearing about, them being throttled a little bit, on Facebook and things like that. But for the most part, Daily Wire, part of the reason, I think of like Forrest Gump. Forrest Gump, he strikes it rich with his shrimp boat because all the other shrimp boats get destroyed in the storm. And so he's the only one. So the competition is gone. Part of the reason the Daily Wire was successful is because they were kind of right there in that sweet spot. And what I mean by that is they were more conservative than any mainstream thing, than Fox News or, anything else. But they were also constantly playing it safe, right? Constantly hedging their bets. Ben Shapiro, let's just be honest. Ben Shapiro has he was wrong on every major issue for the last 5 years. Ben Shapiro's like, you think of the Daily Wire as stalwart, conservative. Ben Shapiro was arguing for the vaccine.
Arguing against Trump.
And I'm not talking about just for the first 8 weeks. I'm talking like a year in. And he's still saying, the vaccine doesn't make sense for everyone. He'd give the caveats, like maybe not for your kids, but yeah, adults should get the vaccine.
Yep.
And we're talking we're coming up on 2022, even in 2022. Ben Shapiro was largely wrong about COVID, or the most charitable way I could say it is barely right. And then, so with a lot of these kinds of issues, my point is part of the success of the Daily Wire is early adopter, right place, right time, those kinds of things. But also they really did play it safe. And so kind of like the Forrest Gump analogy, they got to go around, fishing the pond, casting out the net for shrimp, and every other ship has been, destroyed. Whereas Nick Fuentes, when you put it into perspective, right, the guy just hit 1 million followers on X, and he was banned from X for years. And I think he just came back in 2024.
I think so. Mid 2024.
He's been back on for barely a year. He's still banned from YouTube. So people say, well, he's fringe, or yes, he has been made fringe by the elites, by the overlords. Imagine if Nick Fuentes, not just today, right, but all along, had a YouTube channel, had an X account, had all the things that the Daily Wire had, I think he'd be bigger than Ben Shapiro by a long shot. I think even with running with weights on his ankles for the past 10 years, I think he will still, give it enough time, be bigger than Ben Shapiro. I really do. So the point is, when you have someone like that, I don't think it just represents like, well, that's the danger of poisonous ideology and blah, blah. No, I think when you have something like that, you have to ask why. You can't just accuse and point the finger. You have to stop, even if you don't like it, even if you don't like the idea or the principle or the person, you have to stop at least for a moment and at least consider, ask the question, why is this person that I hate, that I find to be so dangerous or so this or so that, why are they so popular? Why is their material and their content so contagious? Why is that? Why is that? And I think there's a lot of answers to that. One of the answers is that Nick is actually right about a lot of things. Another answer is because young men in the West have been absolutely despised, hated, suppressed, robbed of their inheritance, robbed of opportunities. You're talking young, white, straight men, especially young, white, straight Christian men in the West for at least a decade, and I would argue longer, but at least the last decade in a palpable, tangible, unavoidable way have been hated, despised, and robbed. And very few people have talked about it until recently. Nick has been talking about it for 10 years. There's a reason why he has the momentum that he does. And to recognize that and to say, you know what? Maybe he's wrong on some things. Or maybe the way, his rhetoric, the way that he says things, maybe that's wrong. But the idea that he should not be able to get on an airplane, not be able to have a bank account, not be able to have a platform. You've got all these other leftists talking about transing kids, and they're allowed on free speech platforms.
The transgenders were allowed on the White House lawn to celebrate Pride. He can't take a flight despite never being charged.
Crazy.
Transgenders can shake body parts on the White House lawn and be lauded by the president.
Right.
These two don't seem very equal to me.
It's not right. So the gatekeeping from conservatives, I think, has been a plague. I think it has been a plague, and by God's grace, it's ending. And Tucker Carlson being a part of that, and he has a lot to lose. I mean, he got a ton of flack over the last 48 hours for this decision, but and I don't think he's surprised by that. I think he knew. I think he absolutely knew what the fallout would be, and he did it anyways. And he didn't do it because he agrees with Nick on everything. He did it because in the big picture, I think he knows that it's right. It's not right that this 21, or 27-year-old single man has been absolutely suppressed and silenced illegally in many cases for a decade. Right. So good on Tucker Carlson.
I like how you said gatekeeping from conservative ink. Because actually, I don't want to put words in your mouth. We're not actually critiquing gatekeeping as a whole. Right. If the right is ascendant and we win, you absolutely should gatekeep from the left.
Correct. Yeah.
But in this case,
there should not be transgender people on the White House lawn. So it's like, well, wouldn't you gatekeep them if you guys were ever in power? Of course.
Right. That's why you have to win.
Well, how come you're allowed?
So you can gatekeep.
How come you're allowed to do that? Because we're right. What is this equal standard? I don't get it. It's like we should have equal standards. Christians should tolerate wickedness equally to wicked people tolerating righteousness. Wait, what?
Hang on a second.
It doesn't need to be equal at all. Christians don't have to tolerate degeneracy, and degenerates absolutely must tolerate righteousness, or they need to go to jail or flee the country.
Right.
It's a wonderful principle, perfectly biblical. No, there's nothing equal about it.
And that was some of Nick's critique early on. He says there's a number of openly gay men that have platforms in conservative party, and they're welcomed. Why aren't they gatekept? So the kind of final takeaway here is, well, do you want to gatekeep gay conservatives? Which it's not a misnomer. Right. That's very consistent. If we want to gatekeep gay conservatives, you seize power. That's how we win all of this. We do the gatekeeping. The right people let the right people have the platform. And we're celebrating an old, stale neoconservatism that gatekept for decades and kept everyone with even the mildest critique of our foreign support to Israel. It kept them out of the limelight. It kept them from having a job. At its height, they couldn't even fly on a plane. And that system died on Monday, to
Yep.
which we say,
Amen. Agreed. Okay, let's go to our first commercial break and we'll be right back. When we think about what powers our modern world, fighter jets, clean energy, even the phone that's in your hand, we rarely stop to ask the question, what powers our power? See, it all comes down to a handful of critical minerals, and most of these minerals come from overseas. Now that is a problem. Saga Metals is working to fix this problem. Their mission? Build a secure, independent future for North America by developing domestic sources of titanium, lithium, and uranium, the materials that our economy and defense depend on. Their flagship project in Labrador, Canada spans 160 square kilometers with a 15,000 meter drill program underway, driving a potentially world-class titanium resource. Saga has also partnered with global mining leader Rio Tinto, which can invest up to $44 million in Saga's lithium project, a major vote of confidence. Now, Saga Metals trades publicly under SAGMF in the US and SAGA, that's Saga, in Canada. With the race to secure supply chains heating up, a company with assets like these won't stay under the radar for very long. So learn more at sagametals.com. Again, that's sagametals.com. Hey friends, Gray Toad Tallow is a family business making skin care the way that it should be, simple and clean. The company began as a personal mission to find healthier, more affordable solutions to common skin problems without the chemicals that are found in most products today. Now, that search led to crafting balms from grass-fed, grass-finished animals that were naturally rich in vitamins and healthy fats, which is exactly what your skin craves. These balms fight dryness, they calm eczema, and psoriasis, along with other stubborn skin issues, without containing all the nasty toxins. Gray Toad Tallow offers everyday soaps, balms, and beard balm for men. To experience some of their products, grab a balm sample pack. Each batch is made with care in their home and shipped directly to their customers. For skincare, the way that God designed, natural, clean, and effective, visit graytoadtallow.com. Use code RIGHT15 for 15% off your order today. Again, that's graytoadtallow.com. And if you want 15% off, then add the promo code RIGHT15 today.
America is a country that was founded for the purpose of allowing Christians to do their duty before God and not to have their consciences ruled by the doctrines and commandments of men. Reece Fund exists in order to see the 10 Commandments properly applied, not just as a plaque on the wall, but to actually be used in business as though they're commandments from God that we're supposed to obey. Our goal is to find businesses and to buy them and to build them up. We want to find manufacturing businesses and use them to make sure that we can maintain our capacity to do things here. Reece Fund, Christian capital, boldly deployed.
Good. All right, we're back. I want to start by reading a tweet. So now we're going to be talking about the interview with Tucker and Nick in relation to kind of the latter portion of the interview where they started to talk about young men, young women, the plight of young men, and how come young men aren't dating anymore? How come they're not getting married anymore? Those kinds of things. So I tweeted in relation to that, kind of summing up that portion of the conversation. And I said this: women, Western countries have become a hellhole. We don't feel safe. Men must step up. Men. Women vote overwhelmingly for pro-immigration policies, and now they demand we risk our lives to protect them from the world that they made. Tucker Carlson, the women are right. Why are men choosing to be losers by not getting married? This would be my response. Thank God for giving Nick Fuentes the courage to say in front of millions what America's pastors refuse to say to their own congregations. If people don't like Nick, then they should view him as God's indictment on the church and its clergy. If you don't like Nick Fuentes, you should thank your pastor. That's why people like him have become increasingly popular. We got in a ton of trouble for saying this months and months ago, but I'll say it again because it's true. You don't like Andrew Tate, you should thank your pastor. Young men are absolutely being destroyed. They're absolutely being destroyed. And again, America's clergy refuses to address the very real problems of today. Well, young men should just get married. The entire legal system of our country is totally against men. If you get married and you have children, your wife can lie, cheat, and go to the court, get a no-fault divorce. In some states, get it without having to ever have you sign off on it, without any approval at all. She will win custody of the children. She will win the house. She will win your 401k. She will leave you childless. She will leave you destitute. She will leave you homeless. The legal system politically in our nation will be on her side. Culturally, it's on her side. Your own family members will very likely take her side. And you know what? You bet your bottom dollar, your church and your local pastors will take her side. But pastors, I promise you, like, she's lying. That's not true. That's not what happened. I did this and I'm following what 1 Timothy says. I'm following Ephesians 5. Your pastors will look at you and say, no, you're toxic. You're too patriarchal. You're totalitarian. You're too heavy-handed. You're being harsh. You can't win. You can't win. And this was a moment in the interview where I think Tucker Carlson kind of showed his age. I think Tucker Carlson is great in many, many ways. I'm grateful for him. But at least at this portion, he showed that he's out of touch. Plus, he also did the typical Tucker Carlson thing, which is funny. I appreciate it. He did it with Ted Cruz, right? So, I mean, sometimes I think it's really effective where he feigns ignorance, right? So he's like, really? The Bible says that if we bless Israel, we'll be blessed. Where does the Bible say that? And then, but he actually knows the answer. So he's feigning ignorance.
Right.
And then he's like, well, actually it says it in Genesis 12 and 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 he pins you to the wall. He did that with Tel Aviv Ted, and I was here for it. It was great, beautiful. So I'm not saying that this is inherently wrong, this style of interviewing that Tucker employs on a regular basis. I think that it can be very strategic. So I don't think it's immoral. But there are certain times where it's like, okay, come on, man. Like that level of feigning ignorance is not believable. There was literally a portion of the interview where Tucker said, "What is porn?" It's like, come on, dude.
All right.
Like, okay, I'm pretty sure that a 56-year-old man has heard the word porn before. So he's kind of like feigning ignorance with Nick and like, what is this? And what's going on? So there's some of the feigning ignorance, which, like I already said, is not inherently wrong. It can be a good rhetorical skill. It could be a good strategy. And then sometimes it's just unbelievable and a little bit silly. But beyond that, right? Feigning ignorance aside, the other element that was inescapable, everybody noticed, was that in a genuine sense, no feigning necessary for this. In a genuine sense, Tucker is, I think, stereotypical of most men in the country over the age of 50, even good conservative Christian men like Tucker. They are simply out of touch when it comes to many of the struggles of young single men. But Nick is, painfully in touch and aware of those. It's him. He represents that sector of the populace. And so, Tucker's kind of like, well, I think you just, you can fix it all by just getting married. Well, for me as a pastor, I've been in those meetings. I've done the marriage counseling. I've walked with men as their wife leaves them and divorces them, and they have no say in the matter, and divorces them for unbiblical cause, for unbiblical reasons, and wins the court case and does this and does that. And by God's grace, I've been in not many, but at least, at least one experience where the court actually, by God's grace, sided with the husband. And God, believe it or not, God actually used that to change the wife's heart. And it was a wonderful thing. And so, but by and large, we know that the current system that we live in politically, legally, culturally, and religiously, when it comes to the clergy, spiritually, everything is against men, especially against young single men. And I think that that Nick was able to articulate that. Now, Nick doesn't have all the solutions that I would like to hear him espouse, but he has his fingers on the pulse in a very, very close way in terms of his diagnoses, in terms of the problem. What did you think?
It's interesting how embellic he is of that group of men that are under 30 and unmarried. So Nick is 27. He kind of falls right between 25, 30. And historically, a lot of men were married by that time in life. So a lot of men had a wife. A lot of men maybe had a kid or two. A lot of men had a home. But Nick he's 27. He's unmarried. He doesn't have children. And he's symbolic of, and you guys have to understand this. I'm not trying to sensationalize or just needlessly talk up. But Nick is the perfect image of the type of man that exists now and is saying the modern dating market, the modern marriage market is wrecked. Mm-hmm. For one, a big one is, hey, I'm right wing. Well, most single women in that age bracket, they're left wing. So he's saying, hey, I'm a single man. I'm a right wing man. I believe in tradition. I believe in Christianity. I believe in rule of law. I believe in that race is a real category. And for one, that makes me diametrically opposed, very different from liberal women. And two, I recognize, unlike you, Tucker, in your time when you got married and as you've grown up, unlike in that time, we're seeing feminism. They talked about feminism. It's kind of awesome to hear Tucker say, I believe in patriarchy. That's how the universe is made. But they're talking about feminism, and it's fascinating, and they put their finger on this. Women don't even like feminism when you get down to it.
Right.
Like, do they truly, literally give them a lie detector test? Do you want to go to the office? Do you want to work under fluorescent lights for 60 hours a week and have no children by 35? Is that really what you desire in life? Most women, you give them a lie detector test, they would say, no, that's actually not what I really want. They've been told it. Women are very consensus driven. So the consensus has said, go out, have a career, work the job, make money, be your own boss. But they don't actually really want that. So Nick is saying, we're right wing. Women are not. These women think they want a career, and it's very hard to work uphill with decades of propaganda. It's hard to work uphill when every TV show, every movie, every advert, everything, be it on social media, says, go out, work, have the job. So he's saying, Tucker, you don't get it. The selection for people to date, the arrangements, the contexts. There's a good book called Bowling Alone. There used to be clubs of whether it would be dances or things that were local to the town. What were the purpose of these things? What were they for? Oh, for men and women to interact so they could find someone to date and find someone to marry. Those have all gone away. So where would I meet someone? How would I find someone that's aligned with me politically? How would I find someone that would be willing to stay home and take care of the home and raise children? Very, very, very hard. And I would say to pastors and men that lead men in other contexts, you have to look at Nick and be aware, these are the type of men that are all around you. Going on, you still have to work. There's still jobs out there. And these are the young men I'm excited to actually see discipled and say, don't despair, don't give up on life. You can do it and it can happen, but it won't be easy.
Right, exactly. That last part is key. I think coming off of BLM and wokeness and 2020 and all these kinds of things, again, conservative, Big Con, Conservative Inc., they've responded by saying, well, victim narratives are simply that. They're narratives, and they're always false. They're always deceitful. And so being a conservative means that we don't play the victim game. We don't purport a victim narrative. But that's actually not true in reality or biblically. The reality is that, and biblically, being a victim is actually an objective, real, legitimate category. Mm-hmm. There actually are victims. Irina is a victim.
Right.
I said, well, you know what? She's just playing the victim. No, she bled out and died on a train alone. There are real victims. So the Bible never teaches that it's inherently deceitful or immoral to claim victimhood, because victims are real. Victimhood is a real category. What was wrong with 2020 and BLM is when people who are actually being treated unfairly in a positive light, they're actually getting more benefits than they've worked for. They're actually getting more opportunities than they're qualified for. When that group that is not victimized claims victimhood and tries to get even more and is entitled unjustly, entitled without the merits. That's what is immoral. That's what is deceitful. So victims actually do exist. Well, who are the victims currently in our American context? Well, I'll tell you, and I won't mince words. The actual victims in our American context today are heritage Americans. If you are a man, if you are a Christian man, if you are a non-sodomite, gay, furry man, and if you are a white man, then you are objectively on the books, be it Ivy League schools, or be it the hiring processes of Fortune 500 companies, or be it certain tax brackets, or be it just the general cultural milieu, or even among the perception of your local elders at your local church. If you are a young, white, single, straight man, you are, in the year of our Lord 2025, here in these United States, a legitimate victim. So that's step one. Step one is to tell the truth, right? And what we see from kind of what Tucker Carlson did is like, well, I'm patriarchal, and because I'm patriarchal, the man takes responsibility. Nick responded really well by saying, yes, but responsibility, when completely untethered from any ounce of authority, is slavery.
Right.
If men are responsible, but all the rights and privileges and authority that are supposed to be in God's natural order, coupled with that responsibility, if all the rights are severed, but all the duties remain, that there's literally a biblical word for that. It's bondage. It's slavery. It's totalitarian abuse. That's what it is. Imagine if we said to police officers, look, your duties remain. Serve and protect. Your rights, privilege, and authority is gone. No badge, no gun. So no gun, no badge, but get out there and serve and protect. That's literally like King David sending Uriah to the front lines and then withdrawing intentionally so that he would be put down and murdered in cold blood. It's wicked. In other words, it's wicked. So the first step to helping young men, there have to be solutions, right? Mm-hmm. And you already mentioned some of those. You can get married and you can get a job. But that last part that you said, Wes, is key. You said telling men it's possible, but acknowledging it's hard. And it's harder now than it's been before. And the difficulty attached with these things that are still possible, don't despair, don't lose hope, but the difficulty, the increased difficulty, in many ways, the novel degree of difficulty, at least in recent decades here in the West, that is real, it's legitimate, and it's unfair. It's immoral. It's wicked. You can do these things. By God's grace, you can do these things. However, it is much harder to do these things than it was for your parents. And that's a fact, and it's wicked. You have been treated wickedly. You have been robbed. You have been mistreated. You have had injustice done to you. Really, truly, legitimately. And if older men, if pastors, like by God's grace, such as myself, will just start with that. I'm telling you from experience, I have been, I can tell they listen. And then other guys who are patriarchal, but when they say they're patriarchal, this is what they mean. All the responsibility of a man, none of the rights, privileges, and authority of a man. When they give similar solutions, right? Some of their solutions are actually similar to the ones I give, but they skip over the reality of the difficulty and unfairness of the situation. They skip that part. So there's no acknowledgement. There's no admission. There's no sympathy. There's no compassion. There's no grieving with those who grieve. There's none of that. It's just straight to the solutions. Well, things may be tough, but you're called to be a man, so man up. Yes, women today are voting for communism in mass numbers. And you know what that means? It means you're just going to have to be enlisted and go die for Israel even harder. Be a man. I'm telling you, that does not work. That doesn't work. But if you say what I was willing to say, victimhood is a real category. Black people are not victims objectively on the books. They're not victims, not today, not in 2025, and have not been for quite a while. White, single, straight Christian men are. That victimhood is real, and that victimhood is it's unjust. It's actually wicked. You have been sinned against by every sector of society, by your pastors, by evangelical churches, by your government, by corporations, at every level. Boomers, instead of laying up an inheritance for their children's children, drive around with a bumper sticker on the back of their car that says, "Spending my kids' inheritance." That's wicked, and it's real. But I love you. Now listen to me. Let's do it together. It's going to be hard, but I'm with you. Let's do it together. I'm telling you, I've never met a young man who won't listen to that. I won't. I've never met him. Even in the chat, people agree. They're like, "Yep, I would listen to that. Wish my pastor would say that. Wish my dad would say that. Wish my older brother would say that." Tucker, back to the interview, did not say that. He didn't. And I like Tucker, but I have to say that was an L. And I think that simply is a reflection of the fact that he's 56. I don't know any man over the age of 50 in the United States of America that gets it.
Right.
They're all wrong. It's sad. I mean, it's really sad because you want to talk about what's biblical. Well, here's another thing that's biblical. The 5th commandment, honor thy father. Honor thy father. And I really believe that young men want to honor their fathers, their familial father, literal father, their political fathers, civil fathers, their spiritual fathers, right? Pastors and leaders and elders. I really do believe that. I believe that young men today want to honor God by obeying the 5th commandment and honoring their fathers. But it's really hard when an entire generation, when it comes to the 5th commandment and honoring their fathers, they can look to their fathers and say, I literally can't find a single one of them that's behaving honorably. How do I obey the 5th commandment to honor my father when I have no honorable fathers? We are in a fatherless moment in the West. That's how we got here. We are in a fatherless moment in the West. And that has to be felt. It has to be acknowledged. And yes, that's not a license to despair or to give up or to check out, right? You got to work with what you're given. And in our case, we were given very little, and you have to work with it nonetheless. But to skip to that part, we've got to work with it without even the admission or the acknowledgement of what dire straits we're in, I think is, well, there's another verse in the Bible for that. Fathers, do not exasperate your sons. Today's sons of the West have been fully and completely and totally exasperated by every single father in society. Every single father has chosen not to be a father like our Heavenly Father, but to be a father like Pharaoh in Egypt. Bricks, but no straw. And that's exactly what Tucker did.
Right.
Bricks, make them, but no straw. Responsibility and duties of marriage and children remain, but no acknowledgement of the fact that women are atrocious today. They are immodest. They're hoes. They're dumb, like literally intellectually unintelligent. They are shallow. They are deceitful. They are wicked. They are vile. They vote for trannies. I'm not making it up. It is a 45-point difference between young men and young women today. That's where we're at. 45-point difference. Women are radical progressives. Men are trending right wing. Men are returning to church. Many women are not. Are some women? Yes. But is it objectively less women than the men returning to church? Yes. It has to be said. And there has to be compassion. You have to convince the young man that you're speaking with that you understand and that you're sorry, that you're genuinely sorry. And then begin to instruct him in what to do. That's what you have to do. If you don't do that, you will not experience any success. Any thoughts on that, Wes?
I was going to say, praise God that Nick, at that time, as that topic came up, said, no, it's actually not like that, Tucker. So Tucker gave the view you
Nick
espoused.
did the right thing.
And maybe genuinely, like he genuinely thinks, no, it's not that bad. A man just needs to print out a resume, go in and shake a hand. And Nick said, speaking for these millions of young white men, he said, no, respectfully, it is not like that. And probably a lot of men felt like, man, that's how I felt. I couldn't articulate it, couldn't put it to words. I've heard the other side, right? I've heard the Tucker thing, like just get out there. Come on. Just find a good woman and get married. I've heard that side of it. But actually for the first time heard someone say on the other side, no, actually it's not fair. Now you've got to follow that up with, but all of your ancestors fought through adversity as well. Like at the end of the day, you're here because you have thousands and thousands of men in your lineage that overcame starvation, that overcame war, that overcame famine. If you're here in America, they migrated across the seas, probably many of them. My ancestors were poor with
harsh
no money.
Winters, plagues, sickness, fighting Indians, all kinds of things.
We're still fighting Indians. That one's still going on. But
it's a different Indian this time, but yes, that's still happening. Used to, it was bows and arrows with, native Indians, and now it's kind of like balls of cow dung with a different kind of
It's
Indian.
like born too late to fight Indians for my homeland, born just in time to fight Indians for my homeland. So you need the second part to it too. But it was great that on a platform that big with as many views as it's going to have, I think it was the best part of the interview.
It was.
No,
that was the best part.
It is not like this anymore.
Nick nailed it on that part. In the spirit of solutions, though, practical solutions, let me give you just one, and then we'll go to our last commercial break, and then we're going to deal with the super chats. So let me just say real quick, as we prepare for the super chats, get them in. If you want your comment or your question to be read live on the air, send us a super chat. Send it now. That way we'll deal with it. If you have a question or a comment, it's not a super chat. We'll do our best to get to it, but I'll be honest, as we are getting more and more listeners and more followers and more super chats, I would say the majority of the time, I think at this point, it's over half of the time, correct me if I'm wrong, but we simply do not have time to get to the non-super chat. So if you really have a burning question, even if it's $2 or whatever, that just moves it to the top of the pile and ensures that we will do it. That's been our policy.